Well, it took a marathon all-night session, but House Republicans have passed President Trump's $4.5 trillion domestic agenda.
The measure extends significant tax cuts and dramatically slashes safety net programs like Medicaid. KTLA's Carlos Salcedo joins us from the newsroom with more. Carlos.
Cher, Rick, good evening. Now, there were a few Republican holdouts which delayed the bill's final passage. In the end, only 2 GOP members voted against the mega bill. Now, this gives the president his first major legislative win of his second term, but it didn't come without pushback from Democrats. They were unified in their opposition.
The motion is adopted.
President Trump's big, beautiful bill got a buoyant reception by House Republicans after its final passage in the chamber Thursday, overcoming multiple last-minute setbacks.
Mr. Speaker, that's not America. We're better than that.
Including a marathon midnight session, where Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries set a record for the longest floor speech, blasting Trump's sweeping tax cut and spending mega bill. The passage, falling mostly along party lines, is a huge victory for the president's agenda, allowing him to move forward with $4.5 trillion in tax breaks and increased funding for national security. The president taking a victory lap.
Biggest tax cut in history, great for security, great on the southern border. Immigration is covered. We covered just about everything.
ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons echoing those remarks, posting on social media, "The unprecedented funding for ICE will enable my hardworking officers and agents to continue making America safe again." Democrats saying the bill delivers deep cuts to Medicaid, denies food assistance to kids in need, seniors, and veterans.
I don't think we have ever seen or are prepared for how catastrophic this is set to be.
Nonpartisan estimates the legislation could add more than $3 trillion to the national debt. The GOP plans to offset the cost through cuts to Medicaid, which could result in 12 to 17 million people losing their health insurance. Those with loved ones relying on Medicaid say they're gearing up for a bleak future.
It's really unfair that working, contributing citizens who do need this type of government assistance are going to be cut.
Governor Gavin Newsom calling it the ultimate betrayal, posting on X, 17 million people just lost health care, 18 million kids just lost school meals.
And the bill now heads to the president's desk. Mr. Trump is expected to sign it into law tomorrow at the White House on Independence Day. Reporting live in the newsroom, Carlos Salcedo, KTLA 5 News.
All right. What's going on, good people? It's your boy Jay Taylor, Voices for the Voiceless. And as the title says, debunking the lies told about the big, beautiful bill. You know what I'm saying? So this is going to be a very educational video because, as you heard, a lot of people have, given a lot of false narratives about what this bill actually does. For example, they were saying that he was going to have all these people cut from Medicaid and Medicare, when in all actuality, it's really just trying to get rid of people that are illegal immigrants that receive Medicaid and Medicare. We got 1.7 million illegal immigrants that shouldn't even be in this country receiving those type of benefits. You know what I'm saying? So all the seniors and people that are receiving individual benefits would not be affected. If anything, when we trim the fat, like illegal immigrants and also people that are able-bodied, that are able to get up and work, to apply for like SNAP and stuff like that and Medicaid, all they saying is if you got 20, just do 20 hours of work a week, 20 hours of work a week. Rather, I said a day. If you could do 20 hours of work part-time, 80 hours a month, you can still receive your benefits. So all they're trying to do for people that receive food stamps and things of that nature And people that have children between the ages of 7 and 17, they are, school age children. So if you're receiving benefits and your kids are in school, you can at least work 4 hours a day and continue to get your benefits. I think it's a great plan because it's weaning people off of this long term for life. We relying on benefits from the government. It's actually going to force people to work and to receive a benefits. Able bodied, but if it's certain provisions, it's certain exceptions, I should say, where people that cannot work, that may be disabled or have other ailments, they are exempt from that. But yeah, if you got children between the ages of 7 and 17, they're in school. So while they're in school, you could go ahead and work 4 hours a day and still receive your benefits. So it's a lot of different things like that. And man, I got to play this right quick because we don't want no smoke. Yes, indeed. Let me bring that up. This is the copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowances made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing, nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. All right. So we got that out the way, man. So the big, beautiful bill, man, basically is 900 pages. And, some of my favorites are no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. And, all the misconceptions that all of these people were going to lose their benefits is not true. It's just, it's actually going to put more money in people's pockets. If you a go-getter and you like to work for yours, man, this is the time to grind. No tax on overtime. I believe up to $75,000 a year. So let's say you make $40,000 a year and you do overtime and you get up to like 75K. Once you get up to 75K, they will start to tax you, but it will be a reduced tax. How many times people work that overtime and the government just snatch all that money off your check? It feel like you did all that overtime for nothing. This is no more, but it's only up until the 2028 unless it's extended. So we're gonna see how it works. But yeah, man, the bill just passed and he signed. President Trump signed it into law on July 4th. So I got a video right here too to go in further analysis, and he really breaks it down very well. This guy, his channel is Finance with Avery, so you can check him out. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna go ahead and react to his breakdown, which he did an excellent job. It's a non-biased perception about it.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to Finance with Avery. In this video, I'm going to get into more details about the overtime and tips deductions in the new One Big Beautiful bill. This is from the official bill that just recently passed. President Donald Trump signed it on July 4th, 2025. And as per usual with my channel in these videos, this is unbiased, not political, just the facts, sticking to the facts here. And this bill is over 900 pages long. Check this out. Yeah, I just scrolled through it right there. Yeah, so a lot of pages. In this video specifically, though, I'm going to get into more details about Section 70201, which is the no tax on tip section, and Section 70202, which is the no tax on overtime section. Let's get into it here. First, starting with an overview of it, this new tax break is for the years from 2025 through 2028, and it is retroactive, which means it started now on January 2025. So even though the bill was just signed, just went into law recently here in July 2025, is retroactive. So that overtime you worked in January of 2025, March of 2025, those tips you got in February 2025, April 2025, those will count towards the deduction, given some other things we're going to get into more specifically in this video. But yes, these deductions are retroactive from January 2025 all the way through December 2028 as of now, unless this gets extended and so forth. So what this is, of course, is that you can deduct overtime pay and tips from your taxable income. And this can be used with standard or itemized deductions. These are above the line deductions. So having your deductions itemized is not a requirement for these deductions of overtime and tips. You could claim the standard deduction and have these on top of that. Or if you do itemized, you can still do itemized and have these going on as well. Now, for overtime and tips, you'll still pay Social Security and Medicare tax on that. This only applies to the federal income tax. And one thing that I noted in a couple spots in this bill for sure is that they state Social Security number required. So I definitely want to put that on here because it's on that bill for sure. Check it out right there.
Oh, yeah. So thing that's interesting that I find out about that is, you know, even though the bill just got signed into law on the July 4th, it goes all the way back to January of this year. That's interesting. So when you go to file your taxes, you can write those deductions off. That means more money on your return, which is, man, great. You know what I'm saying? To know that you still have that retroactive, time to file.
Right there. Yeah. So one thing that's stated right there, Social Security number required. Let's get into more details here. Now, qualified overtime and tips. What are qualified overtime and tips? You may be wondering, okay, does this count? Does this count? Let's get into it. Qualified overtime pay is extra pay for working more than 40 hours per week. A lot of you been there, you know that. I'm there. I'm starting off this weekly an overtime day. I'm not scheduled to work normally on this day on Sunday, but I picked it up. I picked up yesterday, over 40 hours last week, going to be over 40 hours this week. So yeah, I know about overtime for sure. So yeah, extra pay over 40 hours per week. And this overtime pay must be paid at a rate of at least 1.5 times your regular hourly rate. So if you regularly get paid $30 per hour, when you work overtime, you'll be getting paid $45 per hour if that's the way that your employer does it. Some do double time and so forth. So, and also this applies mostly to hourly non-salaried workers. Often salaried workers can't qualify for overtime or non-exempt, things like that. This is mostly for those hourly workers, clocking in and out, the time card, punching in their number, swiping their badge. And now,
so as you continue to break this down, one of the false narratives that I forgot to mention was that this big, beautiful bill was supposed to be a disaster for the working class. As you can see, this is really applied for non-salary hourly working workers. So that debunks that narrative right there.
This is all defined under the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is a federal law that guarantees overtime to non-exempt workers. One thing they state in the bill is that the overtime must be defined under the FLSA. And so I looked in the FLSA, and that's what they state for the FLSA above, and more than 40 hours a week and so forth. Now, you may be wondering, okay, how am I going to, state this on my taxes? Do I need to keep up with my overtime hours and things like that? Now, this new law of the big, beautiful bill adds a new requirement that states that employers must separately list how much of your wages were from qualified overtime. Now, I know a lot of times you get a check stub, you'll see it broken down right there. Like, oh, okay, I worked that many hours of overtime. I got paid that much. That's my standard pay. Any other things going on, PTO taken, things like that, whatnot. And so it's going to be new for those departments to get that, separated out so it comes on your W-2 on a separate area, because your W-2 from now forth should have a separate overtime amount area, likely in the new box. So that's one thing that's going to be new, but I would still keep up with your overtime amounts. Like keep that last pay stub, or detail from the last time you get paid of the year. So you have that total amount of overtime you worked for that year, just to make sure, it matches up with whatever's reported on the W-2. Maybe there's discrepancy, maybe something else, then go and keep it for your records. Now, for qualified tip income, tips that are voluntarily given by customers in jobs where tipping is customary. Common services of this, of course, include servers, bartenders, barbers, nail care, valet attendants, spa treatments. Think of it. You've definitely probably tipped somewhere you've been that kind of service. You may work in one of these sectors, that kind of service. Common services where tips are a standard practice, a normal thing. And also, now these tips from your employer must be reported on a W-2 or 1099. And now, if this is not reported on a W-2 or 1099, then it states in the bill, self-reported tips on Form 4137 also qualify if you did not get a W-2 or 1099. So in this case, even if you are thinking you're going to get a W-2 or 1099 for your tips or anything, keep up with your tips as well. You know,
that's dope. Even if your tips are not accounted for due to your employer, you still can report it. You know, you just got to keep up with it, keep your receipts, something that keeps a track of that.
The spreadsheet, the document, the notes app, something, just so you have it for yourself. And also if you need to self-report it. Now let's get to some more sectors like gig work. I know some people had some questions about that on my overview summary video, hoping I can answer a lot of questions, including this one in this video. If I haven't already, as I'm sure I've already answered some, let's answer some more. Tips from gig work. You know, DoorDash, Uber, Instacart, gig work can count. Those tips can count if they are explicitly reported by the platform, you know, DoorDash, Uber, or so forth, as tips. So if they are reported as tips, they can count. And also, you'll need to receive an official 1099 form with clear tip separation. If you have done gig work and you've received a 1099 form from them before, let me know down in the comments. It would definitely help other people watching this video, and I'll be aware of it as well. But wanted to state that those tips from those platforms can count. All right, let's get on to the next section here. That's going to be the overtime and tips deduction limits. Yes, there is a cap to how much you can deduct. So here it is right here. Overtime income can be deducted up to $12,500 for single filers or up to $25,000 for married filing jointly filers. You filing jointly, up to $25,000. You file in single, up to $12,500. That's the cap for overtime income. For tip,
yeah, that's pretty good. You know, just to get that bit of information there. You know, this is really gonna help a lot of people have some extra cash in their pocket. You know, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. They got it capped off. You know, but it's still good though. You know, it's a good luck.
Tip income, the cap for single filers is up to $25,000. For married filing jointly, the cap is up to $50,000. Now, these are the caps for the deduction amounts that you can claim, not for the phase out levels and everything. We'll get to that in the next section. These are the deduction limits. Now, these are not separate deductions. You can claim up to the full amount for both if eligible. If you're in a situation where you worked a lot of overtime and you received a lot of tips, you can qualify for both. Let's say for your single filer, you can have up to $12,500 of overtime income deducted and also up to $25,000 of tips deducted. So yes, these are not combined. These are separate. You can't deduct more than the cap though, even if you earn more. Now, even though of course these are separate and you have the possibility of claiming up to that full amount, that amount can be lowered that you're able to claim depending on your income. Let's get into that. The overtime and tips deduction phase out. So the deductions begin to phase out once your modified adjusted gross income, MAGI, exceeds $150,000 for single filers or $300,000 for married couples filing jointly. So if you file single, your phase out of your adjusted gross income is $150,000 and up. And if you file jointly, the phase out for these deductions starts at $300,000 and up. Now, modified adjusted income is basically the same as adjusted income in a lot of scenarios. If you don't live or work outside of the United States or in a United States territory, basically your MAGI, your modified adjusted gross income, is your AGI, your adjusted gross income. But if you do exclude, foreign or territory income, you'll have to add that excluded income back to get your MAGI, your modified adjusted gross income for the deduction. So if you fall in that situation right there with living outside the United States or a U.S. territory, making money outside of the United States or in a U.S. territory, your modified adjusted income is going to be different than your adjusted income.
Man, I see a lot of people getting income tax time gonna be crazy. People gonna be out here cashing out, like all people that was already getting you know, they got all them dependents and got about 3-4 kids or whatever, they can only claim 2. It's gonna be like they claim 4. That's what it seemed like to me.
So just want to throw that out there. Not for a lot of people who are going to be in that situation. Like I say, their MAGI is going to be their AGI, but just want to state that. Now, how this phase out works: for every $1,000 you earn over the limit, your deduction is reduced by $100. And this applies separately to each deduction. Let's get into some examples right here.
I want to buy your house. I can pay you cash for your house no matter what condition it's in. If you need to sell your
Here. Yeah. All right. Examples of the reduction right here. You're single and made $170,000. That's $20,000 over the $150,000 limit. This is a scenario right here. Now, your deduction gets reduced. Here's the math. $20,000 divided by 1,000 equals 20. All right. Now, 20 times what is reduced by $100. 20 times 100 equals 2,000. That's your reduction amount. So if you earn $12,500 in qualified overtime, you'll have to deduct $2,000, that reduction amount from that. So you'll be able to deduct $10,500 if you're single and made $170,000 in this scenario. So that's the reduction formula. Now, if that same person had $25,000 in tips, they're still going to take away that reduction amount from that phase out of $2,000. So in this situation with this reduction formula, the phase out, single filer, $170,000, $20,000 over the limit, phase out starts. For every $1,000 over that limit, the deduction is reduced by $100 for their overtime and their tips separately.
Get all the OT you can get. They say it's over with by 2028. Got to run up a bag. Got to get that OT.
So this person maxed out on their qualified overtime at $12,500. Maybe they made more than that in overtime, but they can't deduct more than that. So all they can state is $12,500. In their tips, same thing. The highest they can state is $25,000, even if they made more. But now you've got to include the phase out, because this person in this situation is in the area where the phase out begins. They're over it by $20,000. So there are situations where if somebody makes a certain amount over the phase out level, they cannot be qualified for any of the deductions of overtime or tips, depending on that. And I'm going to show you an example of that. Let's get into some specific examples of 4 different scenarios for overtime and tips deductions. Example number 1, Lucas is filing single. He's a warehouse associate. His wages were $58,000. He earned overtime of $9,000. His adjusted gross income or modified adjusted gross income, same in this scenario for Lucas. He worked in the United States, earned in the United States. His adjusted gross income is $67,000. So he is not over the phase out amount. He's under $150,000. Lucas will be able to deduct the full $9,000 in overtime income from his adjusted gross income.
That's pretty impressive. You know, and he stayed up under that. See, when you get to 170,000, you disqualify for, if you make over 170,000, you disqualify for this no tax on overtime, no tax on tips deductions. So once again, that narrative that this bill was tax cuts for the rich and wealthy, it's just not panning out.
So in this scenario, he can deduct that. Now, with these deductions, it doesn't mean that you're going to get a refund of the amount specifically exactly that you deducted. This goes towards your adjusted gross income, which lowers that amount, which means you're not paying taxes on it technically. Just in case that gets lost in translation or misunderstood in some way, these deductions don't mean you just get a full refund for the exact amounts in these deductions. This lowers your income, so basically you're not paying taxes on this amount of income, which is definitely can be a helpful thing. Now, example number 2, Rosalia is filing single. She's a server at a restaurant. Her wages, $35,000. She earned tips of $21,000. So her total adjusted gross income is $56,000. She is under the phase out amount as well. No phase out for Rosalia. She's going to be able to deduct the full $21,000 in tips earned. They're under that cap and they're under the phase out, so they're able to deduct the full amounts. All right, let's move on to some other examples here. Example number 3, This is a married couple with some phase outs. Yennefer and Geralt are married filing jointly. Yennefer is a scientist, Geralt is a tour guide. Their combined modified adjusted gross income is $310,000. Yennefer had overtime of $18,000. Geralt had tips of $32,000. Phase out calculation from them, they're $10,000 over the phase out for married filing jointly at $300,000. So $10,000 divided by 1,000, that's going to be 10 times 100, that reduction amount equals $1,000 in reductions from each deduction. So their overtime deduction, $18,000 is what Yennefer earned. She's got to take away 1,000 from that. So that's going to be $17,000 for her overtime deduction, or for their overtime deduction. This is married filing jointly. Geralt earned $32,000 in tips. He's going to have to take $1,000 from that as well for the phase out reduction. So that brings it down to $31,000. Both of those amounts are still under the cap for married filing jointly. So the combined deduction is going to be $48,000 that they're going to be able to deduct. All right, let's move on to another example here. Last example here. This is a fully phased out example. This is why I was stating it could happen where you make a certain amount of money where you can't deduct overtime or tips. Shepard, he's filing single. He's a crisis management specialist with a DoorDash side hustle. You know, on the weekends, he likes to pick up a little extra cash, you know, maybe check out the scenery. Maybe he has a car he really likes driving. Who knows? That's Shepard. His modified adjusted gross income is $410,000. His tips from that gig work with DoorDash, which they reported on the 1099K, were $7,000. Overtime, Shepard's not eligible for that. He's exempt. He's in a salary position. So outcome for Shepard in this situation, he exceeds the full phase out range. His adjusted gross income is $410,000. Phase out for single filers, $150,000. So he exceeds it by $260,000. So do the math on that. 260,000 divided by 1,000, 260 times 100, $26,000. He exceeds that. Tips from his gig work, $7,000. Boom, that's gone. That's, that got wiped out right there with the phase out. So his tips deduction is going to be zero. His overtime deduction is zero. Didn't earn overtime, not eligible. But if he did have overtime as well.
Wow. So these examples are very good, because this guy, 410,000, he didn't qualify for the overtimes and the tips deduction. So it is really designed to help the average working class individual, that makes between, $25,000 to $100,000. That's a helping the majority of the middle class and the lower middle class. It's, to me, if you're making $400,000 a year anyway, you should be pretty straight when it comes to taxes. You probably don't need all this, but yeah, man, this is good information.
That will be wiped out as well because his phase out range was all the way up there. So that's the example in that situation. All right, everyone. And that is it with my video on the overtime and tips deduction in more details within the One Big Beautiful Bill. If you haven't yet, check out my overview.
Yeah, so man, shout out to this brother here. Finance with Arvin. Yeah, so we're gonna stop that right there, man. Very good information though, just tax on tips and everything. And I don't want to bore you, but if this is something that you guys are interested in, I could do a part 2 and 3 or whatever and talk about other elements of the Big Beautiful Bill. We really much focused in on the no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, debunking the narrative as far as tax cuts for the rich. Nah, that's totally not the case, as you can see. It's designed to help the working class, actually the ones that make the least amount, hourly employees, So, yeah, man, I appreciate everybody that will see this video. And, man, whatever you got questions or whatever, we can figure it out. and let me know what you think about doing some more parts to this to break down the big beautiful bill, because it is going to have a huge effect on majority of Americans moving forward. But yeah, man, it's your boy Jay Taylor, Voices for the Voiceless. We love y'all. Until next time, we should talk to you soon. Peace and blessings.